Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our Maternal Wellness month series, mental health series. And today it is bittersweet because today is our last topic for the month. And today we have Sylvia Romero from Madera County Behavioral Health Services, and she will be supporting us with providing information on the impact of cannabis and how that impacts maternal wellness. And so this is a topic that for most of us, we really don't, really focus on when it comes to maternal wellness. But when we incorporate the impacts of depression, anxiety, and other adversities, this is something that our community can very well be impacted and tend to have not so positive coping mechanisms, right? And so Sylvia, go ahead. I'll just let you, provide all this information.
Thank you, Rocio, and thank you everyone for having me and bringing this information. Again, I'm Sylvia Romero. I'm a health education coordinator with Madera County Behavioral Health, and I get to bring a lot of information, great information, mental health information, substance abuse information to our communities. And today I'm here to talk about the impact of cannabis on maternal wellness. And so I am going to kind of start with a short recap. I know after so many wonderful presentations this month, you already know what maternal wellness is, but just as a review, when we're talking about maternal wellness, we really are referring to overall physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual health, right? So it's all our different types of health, and not just to the mom and the baby, but also the dad and the entire family unit during, before and after pregnancy, right? So anything that encompasses this kind of whole health and whole family is really what we refer to when we're talking about maternal wellness. And it's not always just the mom and the baby, but really we want to talk about and include the dad and the whole family unit. And a couple of things that we know is that positive maternal health and wellness is the greatest factor for a baby's health and wellness. So the mom's wellness, how, her physical health, her emotional health, her mental and spiritual and social health really can determine the health of the baby and the outcome the baby might have in the future as an infant and as a child. So we really want to focus on this whole entirety of maternal wellness. And again, when we're looking at not just maternal wellness, but the health, we really want to look at those 4 pillars of health. And the 4 pillars of health are our physical health, right? And that includes physical wellness, our body, what we're eating, our diets, right? The amount of sleep and quality of sleep that we're getting, exercise or lack of exercise, and also our change in hormones, changing in body chemicals, how is that affecting us? And then we also want to make sure that we're looking at our mental and emotional health. What kind of thoughts are we having? What kind of thoughts are we having about ourselves, our families, our futures? What feelings are we experiencing because of these thoughts? And then how is our mood affecting us, right? And then we also want to look at our social health. We as human beings, we are social creatures, right? We're social creatures. We want to be around other people. We need to be around other people physically, right? And have that social connection. And so how are our relationships? Do we have social supports? Do we have people that we feel we can turn to and we can trust? And then lastly, one that a lot of us kind of forget, and that is our spiritual health. So this belief that maybe there's something bigger than ourselves. And for some of us, we might say that's God. For some of us, we might say that's karma or energy or the universe, but it's just this sense that maybe there's something bigger than just me, right? And so we have to be mindful of all of these pillars, right? Because if one was to topple over, then the 3 of those would also be affected. So we want to make sure that when we're talking about whole wellness and health, whether it's maternal wellness or family wellness, that we're looking at every aspect of those pillars. And based on our experiences, right, on the things that we do and we, experience every day, our health can change. Our physical, emotional, mental, social, spiritual health can change. And for some of us, we look for ways to cope with those changes, right? To either make ourselves feel better if some of those changes or life experiences are negative, or the opposite, right? But many times when we're feeling challenged, or we're feeling excess stress in our lives, we look for other things to make us feel better. And some people turn to substances, drugs, alcohol, and cannabis. So I think it's very important when we're looking at whole health and whole maternal wellness that we really look at cannabis and other substances. So I'm primarily going to speak about cannabis, but a lot of the other drugs that we're talking about can have similar, if not much worse effects to the body, to the mom, and especially to the fetus and the baby after, and the infant. So let's look at cannabis during pregnancy and after pregnancy. And so I'm not going to go extensively into what cannabis is, because a lot of us kind of have been informed of what that is, and that information is readily available. But just to review, cannabis is the plant. It comes from Cannabis sativa linnaeus. And there's two subspecies. There's actually three subspecies, but when we look at cannabis and the psychoactive parts of it, there's two subspecies, which is the sativa and the indica. And out of these plants, there are many derivatives. So there's many different types of cannabis products or cannabis use of it. And the most common is marijuana. So marijuana is the dried leaves, flowers, stems, and seeds from either the sativa or the indica plant, right? And those can be used either inhaled, combusted and then inhaled, or used with the other types of derivatives. So some of the more common derivatives include hash oil, honey oil, or butane oil, which is this kind of honey-like substance that is a much more concentrated form of cannabis. And then we can also use, or those derivatives can become even more concentrated, which is known as wax or butter. And then even more concentrated is shatter, which is more like a hard candy kind of material. And when we're looking at these derivatives, the two main chemicals, right, or the ones that we know of the most in cannabis is THC. And THC is delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol. And this is the main psychoactive chemical. This is the chemical that gives people that high feeling, that sensation, right? And it affects our system. And then the other chemical in there that's really been kind of highlighted within the last 10, 15 years is CBD, or cannabidiol. And this is a non-psychoactive chemical, which means it doesn't necessarily give the user that high feeling, right? And instead, one of the things that research has shown, very, very small amount of research, is that CBD can have some therapeutic uses. So that is still kind of under research and under study, but there has been some therapeutic uses associated to CBD. And so a couple of things that we know of, especially within the last 20 years, is that levels of both CBD and THC have been changing, right? And so when we're looking at the most common way that people use cannabis, which is marijuana, and again, it's usually combusted and inhaled, and those historically have been anywhere from 4 to 5% THC. But in the last 20 years, we really have seen a huge increase in average THC levels. So today, average levels of the actual marijuana plant or the dried flower part is anywhere from 10 to 15% THC. Whereas some of the derivatives, some of the other concentrates and extracts can range from 40 to 90, sometimes even more than 90% THC. So at that point, it is very chemical based. And with CBD, that's very different. We don't necessarily have the levels and percentages of CBD, but one of the things that research has shown is that, you know, prior to 2000, levels of THC and CBD were almost equal. So we were looking at about 3 to 4%, both THC and CBD. And again, now THC has risen. CBD has continued to kind of stay the same, and in some cases actually decrease in some of the products. So because cannabis is a plant, it can be crossbred or hybrid. And so there's different types of hundreds and hundreds of types of marijuana and cannabis plants. And so levels of THC can vary widely, as also with as well as CBD levels. And through all of these different types of derivatives, so whether it's you know, the oils or the butters or even the marijuana products, there can be other products that are made from that. And so products can include things like inhalant products, so cigarettes, for example, or blunts that as they're called, using the actual flower, dried flower. But some of the concentrates can also be used in vape and vape products. For example, they can also be done in edibles using food products and drinking products, as well as tinctures. And tinctures are droplets that are processed with alcohol. So a lot of times just droplets that can be ingested. And then other kinds of topicals, so lotions, creams, balms, things along those lines that contain THC and CBD, or in some cases only CBD, or in some cases only THC. And so when we're looking at cannabis use, it's also important to look at some of the data behind that, especially when we're looking at pregnancy. So when we're talking about, you know, how many women use cannabis during pregnancy, one of the things that we're noticed is a sharp increase in that. And the data that you're going to see here in this slide comes from the National Survey on Drug Use and Health. And this survey is done annually by the federal government, by SAMHSA, which is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, our federal branch from the federal government. And one of the things that they see, because it's done annually, is they can refer back and do a longitudinal study. And so when we're looking at women ages 12 to 44 years old, right, which is those childbearing years, is that from 2002 to 2017, which is the last year that we have data for, is that women who are using cannabis has doubled in those 15 years. So whereas you can see in that first, let me see if you can see my little arrow on here, when you can see in this first graph. So kind of as a reference, if you look at the first two bars, you notice the darker green is 2002, 2003 fiscal year, and then the lighter blue is the 2016-17. So for women in general, 12 to 14 years old, at today's, we're looking at about 11% of women use cannabis or have used cannabis within the last month. When we're looking at pregnant women, about 7% of pregnant women have used cannabis within the last month, compared to about 3.4% in 2002. So again, those rates have doubled in 15 years. And then the other three, you'll see numbers on first trimester. So again, we're seeing women in their first trimester using about actually more than non-pregnant women. And many times that's because they might not know they're pregnant and they're experiencing, you know, morning sickness or nausea, things along those lines. And maybe they might use that for those purposes. And then we do see rates decrease from second and third trimester. And then the second graph on here is daily or near daily cannabis use by women. And so you see about 4%, a little bit over 4% of women 12 to 14 years old use cannabis in 2017, and I can bet that those numbers have increased today. But we also see about 3.5% of pregnant women use on a daily or near daily basis. And so, again, there's a lot of different reasons why numbers have doubled, if not more, in the last 15 years. And one of the biggest ones that we see is medicinal and recreational legalization in this country. And which can increase availability for women, so that's no longer something that they can do in the shadows. You know, they're more likely to walk into a dispensary, or things along those lines, that where it's more available to them. And then with that legalization and decriminalization comes destigmatization, which means a lot of people don't perceive the harm as much as they did in 2002. So, attitudes towards the use and attitudes towards use during pregnancy decrease when we're looking at harm and what, the perception of harm is during use or of cannabis use during pregnancy.
It's important that I'm sorry to just bring up a comment that there is a lot of controversy over this, right? Because some of our, in our medical society, there are providers that do prescribe it. But now more and more they have come out and really given an opinion on any substance, that no substances in any amount of substance is proper substance that will cause any harm, because we really don't know. There isn't much studies on the effects of a woman that does consume cannabis or marijuana during pregnancy, and the long-term effects of what that entitles when when they have their babies. What are some of the other emotional dysregulations or cognitive disabilities or physical complications that can happen in the long run? We really just don't know. And so, for most of us, we see that, if there are a lot of women that are pregnant and consuming, and or after they have delivered, we really need to be mindful of what are we tend to look more of what we need in the moment versus what are the complications or ramifications that we'll have in the long run. Yeah,
absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Rocio. Absolutely. And one study that I just recently read that I don't have information in here for is pregnant women that go into dispensaries for nausea, morning sickness, things like that. One of the things that they found is that 70% of the dispensaries were saying, oh, sure, use cannabis products, use our products for pregnancy, but only 30% of them were referring them back to their OBGYNs or their primary doctors. So one of the things that we have to also keep in mind is that cannabis, and especially here in California, and as you can see in most of the country now that either it's fully legal or decriminalized, that it is a business. Right? Primarily, this is a business. And so when we're looking at, where we get our information from, right? Where we get kind of ways of how to deal with some of these health issues that we have, that we do it in a place that's legitimate, that is, knowledgeable with this health that we're working on. So absolutely. Thank you, Rocio, for mentioning that. And so as you can see, here's the map of the United States, and really, only 6 states have fully or have remained fully illegal when it comes to cannabis, which means that 44 states in our country have either some kind of fully legalization or medical use of marijuana or cannabis as legal or decriminalized, right? So that's of April of 2020. And I want to show you, this is a short little kind of commercial, and this again was also done by the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, but I think it works like a really good kind of a turning point so we can talk about some of these issues. So I'm hoping we have audio. If you can let me know, Rocio. Okay, so I'm gonna stop share, and I apologize, but I want to make sure that you have sound when you see this video. Okay, so I'm going to rewind that. Here we go again, take 2.
This changes everything. When you find out you're going to have a baby, suddenly you know it's time to be more careful with yourself and say goodbye to risky things like using marijuana. Because the chemical THC can cause serious problems with brain development and growth, or even preterm birth or stillbirth. And if you use marijuana after your baby's born, THC can wind up in your breast milk and be passed along, which can also affect your baby's brain function. So baby your baby. Pass on marijuana. Learn more at samhsa.gov/marijuana.
So I thought that was just a good way to kind of springboard us into looking at some of these other topics. And SAMHSA is a wonderful resource. I highly recommend it if you're looking to get some more information with cannabis and pregnancy. So before I kind of get into talking about some of the possible effects, I do want to remind you that the following medical and governmental agencies strongly discourage cannabis use during pregnancy and breastfeeding. So the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American Academy of Pediatrics, the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine, the National Institute on Drug Abuse, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. And one of the things that they all have in common, that they all say, is that there is no safe use of cannabis during pregnancy, right? There is no safe use. So because research and studies haven't determined, oh yes, 1 milligram or, 1 inhale or whatever, that's okay. The only thing really that they have been able to state is that there is no safe use for cannabis during pregnancy. And I will reiterate that as we go throughout our presentation. So why use it, right? Why use it? And for women who are pregnant or wanting to become pregnant, the number one reason is stress, right? Something's happening, and stress really is that change in our life, right? Something's happening to our life, and I'm feeling a certain way, and maybe or maybe I'm experiencing some of those pregnancy symptoms like nausea or vomiting, morning sickness, and maybe I'm not sure if I'm pregnant or not pregnant, and maybe if I use a little bit, that can help. People use it also for physical pain. So aches and pains in pregnancy can come along with physical aches and pains because of not just the increase in weight, but again, that added stress and chemical changes in our system. Also, women have reported mental health issues. So anxiety from stress, right? And that can develop into anxiety or depression, or maybe our past traumas, which is that emotional pain, right? So, and then again, some women might not recognize that they're pregnant at that point and might continue to use it because of recreational use or because of a substance use disorder. Maybe they have already become dependent or addicted to their use, and so they continue to use it during pregnancy.
This is one note that I wanted to bring as well, is that working with this population, for quite some time already, is that also if it can impact their fertility system as well. And I know that there are individuals that are prescribed cannabis to treat some of those menstrual issues that they can be experiencing. And yes, like you mentioned, Sylvia, like they can be consuming this substance and they're not even realizing that they are pregnant. And so the ramifications of, again, right, you talk about that you're pregnant. Now that you're pregnant, the other anxiety comes, is like, oh my god, I was consuming this for so long, what's going to happen, right? So that's another stress that's built upon worrying about the pregnancy overall.
Right, absolutely. And that's really why stress is the number one reason why a lot of women use, um, that continuous and chronic or toxic stress. And we'll talk a little bit about that further, and how we can really work around that without the use of cannabis. So when I gave you some of that information and some of that data earlier, and we're looking at how, what are some of these effects, or how do we know what cannabis is going to do, what harm it's going to do to either myself as a user or my baby. There are some challenges when we're looking at when we're studying cannabis use. So a couple of things to keep in mind as I give you some of this information is that a lot of the reports and a lot of the studies are based on self-reported data. So that means I, as a woman, can walk into my doctor's office and they tell me I'm pregnant. They might ask me, a lot of different assessment questions. And one of those questions might be, when was the last time you used cannabis or smoked marijuana? And so it's up to me, right, to be truthful and honest. And so if I choose to say yes, maybe I'll say I've only used once a month, or maybe I only used once and then never again, where in reality, I might be a daily user. So that's one of those things to keep in mind, is that a lot of times the data that we know of isn't the complete or honest data, right? And so some of those the percentages of use that I showed you earlier can definitely be higher than those. Another thing to keep in mind is that a lot of the studies have little to no account for the potency in the cannabis products, the THC strength. And again, THC is that psychoactive chemical that gives us the high. And so that is very important to notice, because if I'm using a product that's only 5% THC versus a product that's 80% THC, the effects are going to be completely different, right? Especially if I'm using them on a daily basis, or I've been using them for a long-term amount, right? And so how often I use them, how much I use, that it's a lot of, again, these studies aren't really, they don't really take that into consideration. And so we don't get the full picture, right? And then another thing that really can challenge us during these studies is that many people, women especially, including women, also use other substances. So it's not just cannabis, but they might, smoke cigarettes, drink alcohol, take other kinds of medications, opiates, or even illicit drugs like cocaine or methamphetamines during the use of cannabis as well. And so how do we attribute these effects specifically to cannabis, or is it because they're smoking cannabis and some of these other drugs? It's very hard to tell. Also, some of these challenges don't take into consideration what we call comorbidities. So other health and mental health challenges that the user has. So again, some of these past traumas, some of the health issues. So, do I have diabetes, other things like that. And again, mental health challenges that can come about and affect our overall health. And of course, social determinants of health. So we don't know, are the users, are they being affected, and how are they being affected by their levels of education, their geographical locations, their income levels. So all of those can affect our overall health as well. And then lastly, these studies don't always account for cannabis being a federal Schedule I illicit drug, which means that, because cannabis is considered, a Schedule I drug, which is the most highly addictive, little to no medical use. It's very highly guarded also, and so it's not available for even research purposes, and it's very limited to research and medical purposes, and so it's very hard to do human studies and human research with cannabis. And again, a lot of it is after the fact or anecdotal and self-reported data. So a lot of this really contributes to a lot of misinformation, a lot of mythology about cannabis, sometimes even fear mongering, but we do know that there are some effects, right? There is no safe use of cannabis, and we do know that. And some of the more prominent medical institutions have been able to research the use of cannabis and pregnancy. And so I have used some of those medical institutions, some of our governmental institutions, and those are in my references. So to whereas I did get some of this information on some of the effects as we move on. So a couple of the things that we do know during cannabis and during pregnancy, right, is that a mom, a woman who is pregnant, right, the things that she digests, that she ingests, that she, inhales, things along those lines, those get passed through the placenta, right? So if I eat maybe broccoli, right, or a bowl of beans, and some of those gases might also pass to the baby as well, right? We know that. Same thing with cannabis. We know, again, THC, which is, again, the main psychoactive chemical, crosses the placenta rapidly. And it enters the fetus, and it affects the fetus. It affects the physical development of that fetus, and it also affects its brain development. And that can have added effects after pregnancy. And so we know that more research is needed to really understand what the effects of cannabis are and how they affect you and affect the baby. But again, it is recommended that pregnant women do not use cannabis because, again, we don't know what is safe, how much is safe, right? And it's like Russian roulette. Do you want to take those risks? Is it worth those risks for you? And so what do we know? What do we know from the studies that have done, the reputable studies that have been done about cannabis? So when I'm looking at the effects to the woman, right, to the mom, we can look at before and after pregnancy, right? And before pregnancy can also involve during pregnancy. So, but before pregnancy, research has shown that cannabis can have an effect on the woman's ability to get pregnant, right? So a couple of things come into play. The impairment of the fallopian motility. So that's the ability for that fallopian to move and to guide that egg into the uterus. And then once that egg is in the uterus, for the motility of the sperm to reach and reach the egg, and then from that egg to implant itself in the uterine lining. So that receptivity of that uterine lining can be compromised. And so just becoming pregnant is one thing, but also once that woman is pregnant, for that egg to stay in that lining and to be a viable pregnancy. And so this can increase a woman's risk of miscarriage. We also know that cannabis can affect menstrual cycles and menstrual cycle changes because of levels of hormones. It could also deregulate other natural chemicals, which can include changes in mood, drastic changes in mood, changes in judgment, right? Changes in my sleep patterns, in my appetite patterns, which can all, again, have an effect on my rates of pregnancy and carrying a viable pregnancy after that. Also, cannabis has been shown after pregnancy that the deregulation of natural chemicals continue. That means those changes in mood can also become can become more long-term and can become more drastic, right? Changes from one mood to the other in more drastic ways. Again, those changes in judgment. So if I already have my baby, the way I measure risk, things along those lines can become compromised. And my change in sleep. So my sleep can increase or decrease, as well as my appetite. And it's usually increased with appetite. And then things that we know with heavy use of cannabis, it could lead to really issues with learning and memory, especially short-term memory, where we as a mom need to be able to remember things and, whether, when was the last time my baby ate, or do I need to administer medication to my baby, things along those lines. So those can be compromised, putting our child at risk. We also know that there's a reduced in lung function, especially if the user, the mom in this case, is smoking marijuana. So it's that combustion, right? Combustion of marijuana and then inhalation into our system, that we see a reduced lung function and an increased risk of other lung disorders that can come along with that. And then ultimately a cannabis use disorder, which is a dependence or addiction disorder to substances. And that can include solely just cannabis or other substances like alcohol, tobacco, and illicit drugs like methamphetamines or cocaine or heroin. And one of the things that I do want to make sure that I point out is that any substance use disorder in a person, especially the mom, can increase the risk of this cycle of substance use disorders. So again, if I as a mom have a dependence or an addiction to any substance, whether it's cannabis, whether it's alcohol, whether it's another drug, the chances of my children having an addiction or a dependence goes up, right? And it could be again to any drug. So now when we're looking at effects of cannabis to the baby, so before birth, during these fetal stages, right? We know that low levels of folic acid intake, and folic acid is very instrumental to the health and development of the physical baby. And so one of the things that research has shown is that it's associated with neural tube defects, and that can lead a baby to be low birth or even preterm. So again, having that pregnancy not go full term, premature babies. And we know that if a baby is born preterm with low weight, it can increase the chances of physical health issues. Other organs might not be fully developed. So, and that could be long-term or lifelong for some babies. There's also research has also shown that there's an interference in cellular growth and angiogenesis. And this is that formation of new blood vessels, right? As well as developmental processes such as limb development. So again, especially in those early months, that first and early second trimester where the physical fetus is developing, right? Fingers, toes, things along those lines. If there is heavy use, and especially heavy high concentrates of cannabis use, that even physical development of that fetus can be impacted. And then lastly, and most common, is the disruption in neural development. That means the development of that brain. And as you know, the brain is our central, computer for our entire being, our body. It dictates who we are, what we learn, our abilities to do, to move, to speak, all of that. So it can affect the growth of the brain, the development of the brain, and in later years, delay brain growth. And so again, that's during pregnancy. And so what do we know after pregnancy, once the baby is born? What are some of these maybe long-term effects that the baby can experience? So again, the most common is the disruption in neural development. So what does that mean? What does that look like? It really means that this baby is probably going to have some delays or disruption, challenges with learning, right? And that's learning their ABCs, all that schoolwork, right? But learning other processes, right? Social interaction, learning to make friends, social cues, things along those lines. Also memory, especially short-term memory, but abilities to problem solve, to measure risks, right? Their levels of energy and activity, right? So we do see an increase in hyperactivity with babies who have been exposed in utero to cannabis products and cannabis use. There's also a deregulation in mood and impulse control. So that means kids can have a drastic change in moods, and they have a much harder time controlling their impulses. So they're much more easier to react as opposed to sit down and process and then act or speak. And then, of course, we see a lot of behavioral and social disorders that can come along with that neural dysfunction and development impact.
I know that we focus more here on mom and baby, but we also have to take in consideration as well that if there are other individuals in the home that are also consuming cannabis or other substances, that can also increase the ability for a pregnancy to not fully be successful, right? So we also have to keep in mind that it's not only the woman that is pregnant's duty to stay as healthy as possible, but the people around them to support that as well, right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely, Rocio. And so once the baby is born, what are some of the ways that that baby can either continue to have these effects because of cannabis? And some of the things that we've noticed is that baby has firsthand use in some cases, and that could be either through breastfeeding. So one of the things that research has shown is that THC and other chemicals in cannabis pass to the baby during breastfeeding and in the breast milk, right? So it's not necessarily like alcohol where a woman can pump and dump, right? We know THC can stay in a person's system 30 to 90 days, depending on use. And so, if you are a breastfeeding mom, that's something you have to keep in consideration, because not only are you affecting your health, but also the baby's health in these long-term effects, right? We also have seen accidental use of by babies, either of the cannabis products, right, that are maybe left on the table, things along those lines, but specifically edibles, because a lot of the edibles that are out there look like candy, look like cookies and brownies, right? And if I'm a baby or an infant crawling around, and if I see something like this, the first thing that I want to do is put it to my mouth, right? And then other paraphernalia products that might be around. So again, babies can be exposed and infants can be exposed even after birth. We also know secondhand smoke, for example. Secondhand smoke can definitely have an effect on the baby. So if my baby is sleeping next to me or around me, and I'm using, or somebody around me is using, whether it's the dad or grandma or aunties or any other support or social supports around me, that secondhand smoke is also being ingested and inhaled by that baby, right? Which can continue some of these further effects. And then one of the things that we don't always remember is that there's third hand, or what we call third hand smoke, or third hand exposure. And that really is the residue or the oils that are expelled by the use of it. So if I'm smoking, the smoke, the soot, the residue, the ash, that's falling somewhere. That's falling on my environment. That's falling on my couch, on my carpets, right? On my walls. And so again, a baby is crawling around on this carpet or sleeping on this couch. And babies, the first things they want to do is they want to put things in their mouth or stick their hand in their mouth. That can also be ingested that way. And so some of those effects can be used through third hand smoke. So any use, whether it's first, second, or third hand, can increase that baby's risks for problems with brain development and further behavior issues. And so when we're also looking again as cannabis use during, before, and after pregnancy, it's important to also talk about, just like Rocio mentioned, is the support people that we have in our lives. So whether that's dad or whether that's, somebody else in that picture, in that home, that's also, helping me raise my baby, that we keep under consideration, that those can also affect the baby, but it could also affect the mom's health. And again, one of the things that we know is that mom's health and well-being has a huge impact on the health and well-being of that baby. So when we're looking primarily at the dad, before, during, and after birth, that we know that if there's a use of cannabis, that there is also an increased risk of male infertility before pregnancy. And this is usually due to lowered sperm counts and motility. So the movement of that sperm and its ability to enter and impregnate that ovum. And again, there's also an increase in sperm malformation. We also see changes in mood, energy, and attentiveness in men with cannabis use. And then one research study that I did come across, and this was done only on rats, but they were able to publish it, and they felt like the information that they found was very important. So that study showed that male rats in this case that use marijuana appeared to alter sperm prior to mating. So they were giving cannabis and marijuana in this case, and after mating, they caused the offspring to develop distinct abnormalities in areas of the brain that help govern learning, memory, reward, and mood. So again, cannabis was able to change some of their genetic makeup, and that male was able to pass that down, those mutations in their genetic makeup, down to their offspring. So I thought that was very interesting to see, because again, we don't necessarily have research studies that show that in human men, but if these are the results from rat studies, I think it's very important to notice those as well. And then just to reiterate, when we're looking at the use by any adult in the family, is that any substance use disorder can increase the risk of that familial cycle of substance use disorders. So whether it's mom, dad, auntie, anyone involved in raising that child, any substance use disorder, whether it's cannabis or whether it's to alcohol or anything else, increases the risk of the next generation also being dependent on substances. And again, to make this point, I can't make this clear enough, there is no safe use of cannabis during pregnancy. There is no safe use. And if you have any questions, or if you feel like, well, this is the only thing that I think could help me, that you really talk to a medical professional about this. Talk to your doctor, talk to your OBGYN, because there could be so many other things that you could use that might not have the same effects to your child during pregnancy. So really quick, I know I only have 10 more minutes to go, but I really want to kind of talk a little bit about stress and other things that might help as opposed to that cannabis use. And then I also want to highlight a resource here in our community of Madera. So yes, being a parent in pregnancy comes with a lot of stress, right? A lot of stress. And so that stress can also damage us and can bring all of these effects. And I know the beautiful and wonderful topics that have been shared in this platform throughout this month really have highlighted those, right? And they've really have brought them to the forefront. And we know that toxic stress, mental health issues can have a huge impact on our pregnancy and the development of our baby, our physical and mental development of our baby. And so how can we, reduce some of this toxic stress? How do we address some of these issues without having to turn to substances that could negatively impact our baby, right? So a couple of things is knowing that because stress is the #1 reason why pregnant women seek cannabis use, is keeping in mind ways to reduce that stress. So 3 things that we need to keep in mind when we want to look at ways of reducing our stress is that we want to recognize that our thoughts impact how we behave, and it impacts how we feel. It all starts with our thoughts, right? And so if I'm constantly having these thoughts that are just running through my mind, I have to be mindful that they're making an impact on how I behave, right? What I do to myself, how I treat myself, and how I treat others around me. I also want to make sure that I focus on the things that I have the control over versus things that I can't control. So I can control my thoughts. I can control some of my emotions, right? And some of my behaviors. I can't control other people. I can't control how other people will act and behave. And so just being mindful of that. And then also keeping and being flexible and open to other ways, other holistic ways of dealing with stress, right? Because maybe as a teenager or maybe before my pregnancy, cannabis was something I turned to often for stress. Now I need to look beyond that, right? And being open and flexible to try different activities or looking for different resources outside of just this cannabis and the substance. And some of those strategies can depend, and they can be as basic as, really watching the things that I'm eating, right? Because we know things like high sugar, high fat, those have a way of affecting our mood. Also, our quality of sleep. We need sleep. That is when we regenerate, right? We regenerate during sleep. And so am I really sleeping? Am I having good quality sleep? And having to look at, okay, well, am I drinking caffeine too much? Again, stress in itself will reduce my quality sleep. So looking at those routines before bed, my hygiene, and those include things like, again, showering, changing, combing my hair, brushing my teeth, basic things like that. Also exercise. And the exercise has been proven to help reduce those symptoms of stress and symptoms of anxiety and depression. So, and it doesn't necessarily mean, oh, you have to go get a gym membership. That just means, getting especially out into what we call vitamin sun, right? Getting some sunlight, fresh air, those really can help reduce stress. And then there's so many other things like finding the right social supports, healthy social supports, right? Healthy relationships, building those support people, whether it's outside of my friends and family, like support groups, like Nurture to Nurture, right? These can make a huge difference in not just stress reduction, but other mental health challenges as well. And then other what we call self-care things like hobbies and journaling and crafts and meditation, things along those lines that can really help. But if you feel like I've tried this, I've already tried this and nothing's really helping, and my thoughts, my emotions, right, are they're still affecting me, and my stress is just out of control. I can't do the things that I want to do. I can't go to work like I want to. I can't even get out of bed some days. And because of that, it's really starting to affect my relationships, my social supports. Then it's probably time that you get some help, some professional help, right? Talk to your doctor, talk to your OB, access some of these helplines. And those can include things like the crisis text line, the California helpline and warm line, right? The suicide prevention lifeline, where, if you feel like you're in crisis, those are available 24/7 and they're there and can help. And you can also make an appointment at behavioral health services. So just really quick, when here at Behavioral Health Services with Madera County, we offer so many services. We do have 4 offices in our county for help here in the city of Madera on 7th Street. Oops, sorry about that. On 7th Street. And we do have offices in Oakhurst, Chowchilla, and our Pine Recovery Center, which works with our more intensive cases. And we have services like counseling and therapy, and those could be one-on-one counseling and therapy that can include family therapy, or that can include group therapy, where you're working with other people who have similar health issues, mental health issues as you, and they can help support you, and you can build relationships through that as well. We also have psychiatric services that can include medication if needed. dual diagnosis treatment. So for those individuals who are struggling with a substance use disorder, drug addiction, and also a mental health challenge like depression or anxiety or other mental health illnesses, that they have programs that can work on both of those issues, right? When we're looking at treating this. We also offer case management services because sometimes families need help with other things, food, medical health issues, housing, things along those lines. And then again, we do offer crisis services as well. So in order to get help, in order to get services through behavioral health, you just have to call 559-673-3508. Schedule an appointment, let them know, I think I might need some help. I'm pregnant and I might be going through some of these health issues. Sorry about that. And then schedule an appointment, show up to your appointment. That's the most important part. And in hopes that you'll be able to be connected to a counselor and a therapist. And you'll be able to maybe process some of the other health issues that affect us, from our childhood and beyond. We also do have other resources in the community. If you feel behavioral health services is not for you, Camarena Health Services throughout the county also has behavioral health issues. And that's a wonderful program because they have their physical and their mental health together and all in one place. So it's a great resource here in Madera County. But again, I mentioned the California Warm Line, as well as the crisis text line and the suicide prevention lifeline. Those are all there. If you have private insurance, call your provider and ask them for a list of local providers that you can go to here in your areas. If this is a young person, or if a young person is struggling, also there are resources within the schools, like school counselors, school psychologists, and behavioral health specialists. And some more references from our studies today. And with that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much. I don't know if there's any further comments, Rocio.
No, just thank you so much for that information. And, like you mentioned, there's other agencies as well that can provide support, not only for mental health services, but other services that work along with our families, right? Getting support for our kiddos, getting support for ourselves. We're all interconnected, right? But I really thank you for the important information that you provided for the community. I think it's important to continue that. We know that substances are not good for us, but it needs to be a constant reminder that if this is something that we are relying on, that okay, this is not working for me. We know that when we use substance, it's a symptom of something that we've been already dealing with for a very long time. So let's take different approaches, right? And give ourselves that opportunity, give ourselves that permission, right? And so definitely thank you, Sylvia, for providing us information, and thank you everybody from Facebook to joining us in our last topic of our series, and hope to see you guys soon.